then a few years later I thought, hey, I'm going to sell that. So no, there's some really good technology in terms of sharing databases and verifying transactions that is talked about as blockchain. That is a good thing. Bitcoin and ICOs, I agree completely. It's one of the crazier speculative things where it's not, as an asset class, you're not producing anything. And so you shouldn't expect it to go up. It's kind of a pure greater fool theory type investment. So, you know, I agree. I would short it if there was an easy way to do it.
One of the interesting things, if people react when you criticize their investment, if they get mad, they're gambling. You know, if somebody criticizes Apple or Berkshire, we like it. I mean, if the stock goes down, we'll buy more of it because we don't care whether it's just we don't feel that it has anything to do with it. But if we criticize something that they own because they only want it to go up tomorrow, they feel we are hurting them, and therefore they get very upset about it. If they really like what they own, what difference would it make? You know, if I criticize their wife or something, they don't get all upset about it.
Wait a minute. That's a bad habit.
Yeah, probably not the perfect example to use.
In terms of privacy issues, we spoke with Warren about this earlier. What's happened in Silicon Valley, privacy issues surrounding Facebook and Twitter and Google and Apple, and how that has kind of weighed on those FANG stocks, has a lot of people looking towards Washington, wondering if there will be regulation that comes down, and looking towards the European Union, where regulation is coming this month. Bill, you've dealt with regulatory close scrutiny in the past. Is this something that you think is likely to have an impact in Silicon Valley? Will the regulators come? Will it change things in Silicon Valley, and will it make it tougher for these companies to follow their business models?
Well, privacy is a super important issue, but I do think that the big companies, even as regulation comes, which is inevitable, they'll be able to handle it. People don't mind having a little bit of demographic information about themselves used to target ads. That's value added to the user. You know, there are issues about medical records or the content of your communications that are very private. One challenge with the privacy laws is making sure small companies can still get involved in the ad market. These rules could block lots of new companies. So I think the challenge of privacy can be met. The challenge of what gets published on a platform, hate speech, free speech, fake news, and what you allow people to get outraged about, you know, and what you should do. Every government has a view, and so making sure the government takes the responsibility for those rules, I think that's one of the toughest things for any platform where people are expressing opinions. So that's a separate issue, and I think the harder of the two.
You mean acting as a publisher rather than a bulletin board, going all the way back to CompuServe? Right,
and if people expect you to stop certain things and not others, they'll always view that in retrospect. And it's a real-time system with millions of people writing things. Those judgment calls, you need some standards group of the government, not a private corporation, to make those calls.
Charlie, what do you think?
Well, I think we always use television ads to flog the idiots of each party to the polls and to sell them in a very misleading way. And we're just shifting the misleading ads to a different medium. I do think it works better. In other words, I think the Facebook thing, it's really good at flogging angry idiots to the polls. And I think that changes the equation some.
Changes the equation, meaning you think it
It has an effect on politics.
It has an effect on politics, and therefore will bring in regulation?
I think it therefore won't bring in regulation.
Because
it's hard to control people who want to be silly about politics.
Andrew has a question, too. Andrew?
I was just going to ask Bill, but everybody can weigh in on this. Given the ownership of Geico, maybe you have some insight into it as well, Warren and Charlie. I was thinking of autonomous vehicles, where you guys were talking about technology, and even Elon Musk with Tesla. When you look at the cars that are and the car market that's out there, do you see, in terms of technology, any of them doing better than the other? And what do you think of Tesla, actually, as an investment itself?
Bill?
I don't want to weigh in on Tesla.
Yeah, Tesla's making a great product. They have a very high valuation, and they will experience all the automakers coming in and competing with them. And so it's not like some tech markets that the leader gets all that market share. It's going to be a tougher thing. The move to autonomous and electric are proceeding in parallel, and if you take a 15-year time frame, it's going to be a very, very dramatic change. I tend to be optimistic about technology adoption, and I think worldwide, well, there's a lot of cities that want to be the first to get in with these cheap autonomous services. So it's exciting, and the other car companies now have been forced to have strategies for electric cars and autonomous. Some have very impressive plans.
Are there lower
Warren,
insurance?
what does... Oh, go ahead, Andrew.
I was just going to say, are there lower insurance rates, thinking about Geico, for a Tesla or for the new Cadillac that has some kind of semi-autonomous driving, some of these new features that allow the computer to drive a little bit more than the human?
Yeah, presumably any cars that catch on big are going to be safer, and a safer car is going to bring lower insurance rates. There's there's a modest offset to that, in that, in terms of collision activity, the damage is done to a car in terms of a bumper or a side rear view mirror or something. Cost far more now. It's a much more complex product. So the damage per accident, not human damage, but physical damage to the car, that will probably go up substantially. But the number of accidents you won't see widespread adoption unless they're safer. And we want a safer car. So it's net, it will be bad for the auto insurance industry over time if autonomous cars become a big part of the fleet.
Bill just mentioned that over the next 15 years, you are going to see some pretty significant changes.
Oh,
Is that the time frame that Geico is looking at that too?
Well, we don't know. I mean, what it'll be. And you've got 260 million cars on the road. Let's just say that 10% of the people took up autonomous cars in a year. Now you're talking about a 1.8 million out of the 18 million. And there's a big life cycle to it and all of that. But what does best for the consumer and is safer over time and everything will prevail over time. And that's good for the American public. It's very hard to tell who the winner will be, though. Or there won't. It was hard under the conventional car to pick out which would be the company that was doing the best 10 years earlier. That's why Charlie and I have talked about the auto industry forever. So it's very hard to pick winners. And it'll be hard to pick winners 5 years from now. Nobody's going to own the market or anything of the sort.
I am amazed at how good almost all the cars are. With all those servo mechanisms and all that electricity scattered through, you can buy a car and drive it 10 years with practically no trouble. It's an amazing achievement.
I mean, you were big on the electric vehicles too with BYD.
Well, you got to remember, in China you couldn't breathe the air in the cities, so I thought they might end up with more electric cars. It wasn't a very difficult idea.
Let's talk a little bit about Berkshire overall and some of the changes that we've seen this year. Ajit Jain and Greg Abel named as co-vice chairman along with Charlie on this. How has it changed your day-to-day life, Warren?
Well, not a lot, but it's made it easier. It was already easy to start with. I mean, really easy. But the 5% that I didn't like, I just said, oh, those are your responsibilities. That's the way I selected what their responsibilities would be. And well, Charlie can tell you, it's changed our lives very little, but all for the better. It's been very, very good for Berkshire, and it's been even better for me.
Charlie, you were a proponent of this. I think it was your idea to name them vice chairman.
Well, it's hardly, you can hardly find two people who've done better in their jobs in all of America. They're very outstanding people. The truth is, we were too late.
Bill, I know succession is a common or constant topic with the rest of the board members. What does the board think about this, about these positionings, and now that they're both board members too? What does that mean just from board's perspective?
Well, it's exciting to have two, highly energetic, super capable people helping out Warren, and now as board members. I've gotten to know both of them for over 10 years, and I'm just amazed at what they bring. They understand the Berkshire culture because they've been inside it and have benefited from it. So it's great news.
There are people who were wondering if this was creating a horse race for a successor. I heard Ron Olson's knocking down that idea over the weekend. How would you respond to that?
No, it's not a horse race for being the successor. That's not a good way to characterize it.
What is the right way to characterize it?
That the number of businesses that report to Warren is a pretty unbelievable number. And today I've gone from one person with all those businesses reporting to him to 3 people. So the company's not adding, a lot of staff, under Greg and under Ajit. You just have 3 great business minds managing, over 50 business entities. So it's still one of the leanest management structures you've ever seen. If you draw it out as an org chart, you have to have one of the widest pieces of paper ever, even with the 3 now. Berkshire's still very, very unique.
All right. Folks, we are going to have more of this conversation with Warren Buffett, Charlie Munger, and Bill Gates. We will be back with more from Omaha, Nebraska, right after this. Welcome back to a special edition of Squawk Box. We are live from Omaha, Nebraska, and we are joined this morning by Bill Gates, the co-founder of Microsoft and a Berkshire board member, Charlie Munger, who's the vice chair of Berkshire Hathaway, and Warren Buffett, who is the chairman and CEO of Berkshire. And gentlemen, the last half hour, we've kind of been delving through your thoughts on the markets, on technology, on privacy issues, on Bitcoin. I thought we might take this next half hour and go a little broader, because all 3 of you have big ideas about the world and how to fix it. You have spent a considerable amount of money and time on philanthropic projects, on trying to find ways to move beyond, and you all happen to know a lot about so many different things. One of the issues that's been so much in the headlines over the last 6 months or so has been Berkshire's move to go along with JP Morgan and Amazon to try and come up with a way to rein in healthcare cost and healthcare cost inflation in the United States. Warren, we've talked with you about this, but we haven't gotten the chance to talk with Bill and Charlie so much about this. And for those who don't know it, by the way, Charlie, for the last 31 years, has been the chairman of the board at Good Samaritan Hospital in Los Angeles, so he knows an awful lot about healthcare. Bill Gates has worked tirelessly when it comes to healthcare issues around the globe. In fact, the Gates Foundation has invested $12 billion in global health initiatives just over the last 5 years. So for anybody who's wondering about your credentials on this, there they are. Why don't we start with you, Bill? What do you think about the idea of trying to tackle healthcare cost inflation and how that might be tackled in the United States? Is this something that could get traction?
Well, I think other than improving the education system, making sure the healthcare costs don't continue to go up so rapidly is the biggest issue. If you look at state governments, over time, they've had to shift money away from education and infrastructure into the various healthcare expenses they have. And so it's a problem for the government, it's a problem for business. So any effort to take a look at this system and how we use the latest technology to make it more efficient, to reward the low-cost providers so that they gain market share, I think that's fantastic. I've studied it a lot, and I don't think it's an easy thing to fix, but it's fantastic that the three companies are going to work together. To the degree they succeed, there are hundreds of companies that would love to join in, but first they've got to hire some people, and it's got to come into focus.
Charlie, let's just talk about how fixable you think this problem is. Do you see a lot of rampant waste when it comes to these issues, at least from your perspective at the hospital?
Rampant waste is a good phrase, of course. Our system is shot through with rampant waste, and a lot of the medical care we do deliver is wrong. And so expensive and wrong is ridiculous. A lot of our medical providers artificially prolong death so they can make more money. I regard that as deeply immoral, and there's a lot of it. And so I think the first time the Democrats control all three branches of government, we will get single-payer medicine. I think it's so bad that people will reach out for a complete change forced by the government. To have a young person have a $5,000 deductible when he has a baby, that's not insurance anymore. It's some stratagem to make things better for some insurance company, but it's not really medical insurance. This whole system is shot through with defects, and of course I welcome the fact that Berkshire is trying to make it a little better in some ways.
If you could fix it, how would you go about doing it? Are there, maybe not easy ways, but are there obvious ways of trying to tackle that?
It's very hard to get to a system like Singapore's, which costs about 20% of what our system does and works better. From where we are now, we will never get there, in my opinion, in a big, rich nation like ours. But we can have a better system than we have now.
Would universal health care be the answer? You said you think that's what would happen.
Well, there are many defects in universal health care, but universal health care with an opt-out, which they have in all the advanced nations, England, Canada, and so forth, it's a perfectly reasonable system, and it exists everywhere else, so I'm not frightened of it.
Universal health care with an opt-out being basically universal health care that rich people pay more for and get a different level of care, is that?
Sure, even in Singapore, if you want a better hospital room, you don't get a better doctor or a better nurse, but they'll give you a better hospital room if you want to pay for it.
Andrew has a question.
I see nothing wrong with that.
Andrew has a question, too. I'm assuming it jumps onto this. Andrew.
It does on the healthcare front, and it's for Warren. Warren, historically, you've allowed all the managers at Berkshire to run their groups autonomously and haven't imposed different programs from headquarters. I'm curious, when you do implement the healthcare program with Amazon and JP Morgan, whether it will be voluntary for the managers to effectively choose to be part of it, or whether it'll be something that they're going to have to do.
Well, I may not be around when that takes place. That may be sometime. This is an extraordinarily difficult project. I mean, this is not, and I think it might well be reasonably easy to do a little something here and there, but we're really hoping that something that has gone from 5% of GDP to 18% of GDP and just keeps moving, we can do something about it. You know, we have not picked an easy task. You've got $3.3 trillion or something like that spent on the healthcare system, and every dollar, just like in government, every dollar hits a constituency, has a defender, and I do think it's so important that it should be tried. And what I would tell our managers, and I've told our managers, that we will not be coming up with something that hurts them in terms of the care they receive, if we come up with any kind of a improved product, I can guarantee you that we'll like it. No one will have to stuff it down their throat. I mean, and we will have people join us, but it is really an uphill climb, but we should be doing it.
You said over the weekend that you hope to have a CEO named for this new initiative between the three companies in the next couple of months.
Yes.
Has it been narrowed down significantly, the search?
It's been narrowed down to, a very few, and it's by far the most important decision we'll make. I mean, there's no way. We've got plenty of people who want the job, but it is an extraordinarily difficult job because you have to be plenty knowledgeable enormously knowledgeable about the system, but you have to be able to get your mind beyond it, and you have to understand who your opponents will be. You have to understand public opinion. You have, and you have to, you could bargain down costs in some areas 1% or 2%, but we really hope we can find the perfect person in terms of being able to make a real job. I mean, as Charlie will tell you, there's some history in terms of what happened.
When Rockefeller totally revolutionized American healthcare for the better, he went after the low-hanging fruit. He went after the charlatans and the quacks and so forth. And my guess is that Berkshire will find some low-hanging fruit.
If you had to guess where that low-hanging fruit would be.
Oh, I know there's a lot of low-hanging. I don't want to say.
Okay.
We'll whisper it to our new CEO, though.
Well, speaking of the new CEO, I realize that this is something that Todd Combs is heading it up, but given your expertise, Charlie and Bill, have you had any input into what should happen with this, who the new CEO should be?
Well, Todd's a great learner, and he and I have brainstormed about, what healthcare looks like, but not specifically on who gets hired. Mm-hmm. I think there's three things that are very separable. If Berkshire, finds a way to optimize its healthcare costs versus the entire U.S. healthcare system, and access versus cost are two different things. If you add access, unless you're very careful, like a universal coverage, it will actually drive up costs pretty dramatically.
And potentially lower standards or lower what access people get.
Right, so when Vermont costed out what universal care would cost, even the proponents were stunned at the cost. So we have to perform two miracles. We have to get better access in America and get the cost down.
Yeah. Probably a couple other miracles we don't even know about. The goal is not to reduce Berkshire's costs.
Right.
And we will have a CEO, and I hope, I would expect within a couple of months. And we will need a remarkable individual. That person will have to also have a number of remarkable people who wish to join the person. That's one of the things. You have to have somebody that does attract other talent and so on. And nothing's going to happen fast, except we do want to get the CEO in place, obviously. But you're not going to turn the whole system upside down immediately. But you want somebody that thinks about where you want to be in 5 years and figures out some path.
I mean, obviously, the person has to be an expert in healthcare, but from which arena? Because whatever arena they're coming from becomes...
Yeah, if you talk to somebody who's run a hospital for 20 years, they think everything but the hospital is a problem, And if you talk to I mean, it's just the way it is.
Right. Let's talk a little bit more broadly about some of the issues that we're seeing today. Earlier, we spoke with Warren about trade issues, particularly with China, with our delegation just coming back from China. But trade has been a big issue when it comes to NAFTA, when it comes to our trade agreements around the world. And the strategy from the Trump administration has been a little different than what we've seen from previous administrations. Maybe now we're going to find out if it works or not. We're at that point. Charlie, what do you think about whether or not we're going to wind up in trade wars, or whether you think we get better trade agreements as a result?
I'm pretty optimistic about China and the United States working together. It would be insane for them not to work together and not to develop a trusting, constructive relationship. And I have no reason to think that that won't happen.
Bill?
I agree, although I would say the U.S. is making that a bit challenging right at the moment in terms of predictability and stability and finding the right approach. We're all big believers in the large benefits of trade. And so the fact that the sentiments have turned against it, do you need to do more to help those who aren't hurt by trade. And politically, it's impressive that free trade was not supported by either candidate.
You mean in the U.S. election?
Exactly.
Right. It may be the blowback after what happened in 2008 and 2009. People who felt like they got left behind and who haven't caught up with others. I'm not sure how else to handle that, what the right way about going to do that would have been. But Bill, you're somebody who has to go from nation to nation, country to country, and through the foundation and your work there, kind of hope that everyone can work together. Has it gotten tougher to do that, or is it the same as it was before?
Well, the most important relationship in the world is between the United States and China. Mm-hmm. And you can imagine lots of win-win things with trade, with innovation, with helping to drive stability for the world. We're countries with very different histories, very different governments. And so you do worry as you watch, even in these last few months, the sparks fly. But I think logic will prevail. Our foundation has worked a lot with the Chinese government. We're excited they're becoming a bigger aid donor. So even for the work we do to help poor countries, having this relationship be strong would be very, very helpful.
Bill and Melinda as well have actually done very big and important things in terms of getting countries to work together in the health field. And they have brought the world closer together in terms of attacking, particularly vaccine, but a number of things to do with health. And over time, that sort of thing will prevail in the world. I mean, when people see something working and their lives getting better, and you mentioned the problem of the prosperity. I mean, if countries get far more prosperous, they should figure out a way that all of their citizenry participate in some way. You want to keep the market system, and it does wonders and all of that. But you have seen what you can actually look at what Bill and Melinda have done, and they have influenced other countries to act cooperatively, and it's a tremendous achievement.
You all have been incredibly philanthropic. You've given billions and billions of dollars away. But if you had to look and try and find one arena, one topic, one place that you think gets underserved, aside from what you're already doing with your own money, with the foundation money, is there an area where you would look and say, hey, here's another thing that needs some additional funding, it's overlooked, and it's very deserving? Bill, what do you think?
Well, there's so many important causes out there, and we picked global health and education, and by sort of specializing in those, you can do a good job. But the needs are really vast. Some philanthropists are working in the U.S. justice system to deal with the inequities there. We do some work on poverty, but there's many others who have different cuts on that. The beauty of philanthropy is you're taking on, these social goals that are very, very difficult to achieve, and trying to show government how to do a better job. And so it's been rewarding. There's a lot of progress, but there's so many causes. And as Warren and I encourage other people to do philanthropy, we hope they'll pick one of these unmet areas and get a passion for it and bring their same skills they had in business, because that's huge value added, even beyond the money.
You're talking about through the Giving Pledge. Where you
Ideally through the Giving Pledge. I mean, we sit and talk with people about philanthropy, and most of those people do end up joining the pledge.
Charlie, how about you? What areas?
Well, better drugs and devices have the advantage they work almost automatically. And the one I see that will change the world is the new IUD, is a huge contribution to human civilization. And it's just sweeping. And it's going to change. That's going to change life. And the beauty of that, it didn't require any government, didn't require any pompous bureaucracy. So they just invented a better way of doing it, and it spreads automatically. Well, I love that kind of thing. And of course, I like the vaccinations. Think of the good that it does to do the vaccinations. And of course, if you vaccinate and I don't, it doesn't work as well. So naturally, the nations cooperate.
Right.
But Bill's going to get more cooperation than Warren is.
Because?
There's more incentive for the people to agree with Bill. Warren's taking on entrenched interests who aren't going to like it at all.
Bill, very quickly, before we go to Warren on this, can you give us an update on where polio stands right now, just speaking of these vaccinations?
Well, we have two countries that we haven't gotten rid of polio in. It's Pakistan and Afghanistan. We're making sure it doesn't travel to other parts of the world, so we have to keep the vaccination rates up. We're doing a better job getting out to all the children in those two countries. So with luck, this could be the last year with cases. But it's very tough. You know, it's every morning I get up and see, okay, what does the case count look like? And we actually sample the sewage to see if there's any polio being transmitted. So we're very close, but zero's a magic number. If you miss it, then you know you have to go another year. So we've got our fingers crossed.
The reason that you sample sewer samples is because...
Amazingly, if a kid has polio and they're in that city, if you go look in the sewage, there's so many viruses out of even a single kid that we can detect it. And we can see which virus it's like, and so we can understand where it came from. So that's actually our best tool, is that we politely say environmental sampling.
You can see why I delegate philanthropy. My urge to sample sewage is not... I've gotten 87 without any urge to sample sewage. Bill gets excited about it.
Bill Gates has a huge advantage. Nobody's in favor of infantile paralysis. And a lot of people are in favor of medical practice as counterproductive.
Although it's not a slam dunk for the vaccinations. You've had trouble with some cultures who don't like you coming in there, and some vaccination workers who have gotten into big trouble too.
Well, you get rumors about vaccines,
Yeah.
even in the U.S., that is this good for the child? If you have a child that gets a fever afterwards, people worry about that. So you have to constantly remind people of how beneficial it is, and every once in a while when coverage rates go down, then you'll get lots of measles or pertussis coming in. So people who understand really want these things, and the progress has been phenomenal. But we have to create demand as well as supply to meet our goals.
Warren, I want to come back to you just in terms of finding a cause that you think is important, that you maybe hope somebody else will spend some time on.
Well, I think the #1 problem of mankind is weapons of mass destruction. I mean, we have learned since 1945 how somebody with bad intent, or some organization with bad intent, or occasionally some government with bad intent, the knowledge is there of how to kill millions of people, and in some cases the intent might be there. The materials have been hard in the case of nuclear to some extent, and now you've added cyber to the equation. So that's I consider that the #1 problem of mankind. I don't know how to use money to fight it, particularly, but then I believe in women having the right to decide what to do with their bodies, and that's been advanced very considerably, but there's still a lot of work to be done there. But I believe the #1 problem to get beyond weapons of mass destruction in the United States is to figure out how to maintain all the benefits of a market system which works wondrously in creating more output all of the time, and at the same time make sure that people that really don't fit a market system very well still live decent lives, and we've got the resources to do it, and we've made a lot of progress on that. Social Security was progress. I mean, we take better care of our young and old, but we don't we haven't figured out the way to take some very good care of somebody that just doesn't fit into the market system, but's a perfectly decent citizen, and a rich society should solve that one.
Andrew has a question as well. Andrew?
I don't have a serious question, Becky. I have a hopefully fun question for the bunch. This was actually a question, Warren, that came in over the weekend from a guy who was in the audience, Alexis Ohanian, who's the CEO of Reddit. He's also the husband of Serena Williams. He was desperate for us to ask this question, so I'm going to ask of you. Bill Gates has, by the way, already been asked this question. It's a famous question on Reddit in these Ask Me Anything sessions that they do. It's a bit of a logic train question. So the question is this, and I don't know if you've ever heard it. Would you want to battle a one horse-sized duck or 100 duck-sized horses? And there's huge debate on the internet about what the right answer is to this question.
Well, you've gone to the wrong place to find the answer. I will go out and buy a bunch of ducks that meet the test and horses that meet the test, and we'll have a real life illustration. But I do not bring any insight to that one. Bill probably knows the answer already.
My attitude is that Warren knows more about it than I do.
Hey, I'll ask you guys a question that I was surprised didn't come up this weekend. You all are voracious readers, and generally somebody will ask you guys at the annual meeting what you've been reading recently. Let me just toss that out. Bill, you constantly have a list of what you've been reading. What makes it this year?
Well, the top would be this new Hans Rosling book called Factfulness. It's very readable. Talks about how the world has changed, and Hans shares how he had some misperceptions, that he didn't see all the progress. And I talked to you about how to think about news and where we're going. So that's brilliant.
Charlie?
Well, I read a book by a Chinese economist who had worked in the World Bank, and his general idea was that we had learned better how to help a poor nation develop. There was a lot of stupidity in the early days when we'd give some very poor and backward nation a big steel plant, and of course it wouldn't work. And I think this economist was right. So I think, generally speaking, there's a lot that's right in the world.
Mm-hmm. Warren, have you been reading anything lately that's caught your attention?
Well, yeah, but I narrowed it down a little bit more. I've always recommended Chapter 8, you know, of The Intelligent Investor, and which stays up there among the top sellers book for years. But so in that same spirit, I would recommend reading Chapter 4 of Steven Pinker's new book. And there's some very interesting reasons to be optimistic about the world in that chapter.
What does it focus in on?
Yeah. Tell them the name of the book,
It's
Bill.
called Progressiphobia is the chapter name, and the book is called Enlightenment Now. It's another book, like the Rosling book, that talks about the progress we've made and how we could learn from the places we've made even faster progress. It came out of the work he did in his previous book, Better Angels of Our Nature, where he saw that violence was going down, and now he's looked at a lot of other things like workplace safety and happiness, and it's a more serious read than a lot of books, but really fantastic.
We've spoken a little bit with Charlie and Warren about what they've learned from each other. I'll ask each of you, as we're wrapping up this hour, what you've learned from Berkshire, broadly, as board members, as people who travel together, who work together, who have fun together, and spend time together. Just what it's meant over the years. Bill, I'll go ahead and start with you because you haven't gotten to weigh in on this yet. Something you've learned from Charlie and/or Warren and the board at large.
Well, from Warren, the whole approach to thinking logically, thinking long-term, it's been an incredible education and totally shaped how I think about things. The fact that then there's this incredible set of people, including Charlie and the managers that I've gotten exposed to. We have in our second board meeting, a bunch of the managers come in and talk about their businesses. And it's one of the most fun times of the year to hear about very different businesses and the competitive dynamics and how technology affects them, and how a system where you have these great long-term thinkers with very high integrity who are dealing with these challenges. So, you know, my whole business education started the day I met Warren, and the Berkshire team has helped keep it going at full speed.
Warren?
Well, it's very important in life to associate with people who are better than you are. And it's the most important decision. You will go in the direction of the people that you associate with, and you'll get ideas from them, and you'll see how their behavior works and all of that sort of thing. And the most important decision, usually in that respect, is your spouse. But it's enormously important among your friends to have people that you admire as well as have a lot of fun with, and you will move in the direction of their better behavior. And with both Bill and Charlie, I've learned a lot. I've had an enormous amount of fun, but I pick up on their ideas, and that's been a very good thing.
Charlie, I'd like to have you have the last word today on that topic.
Well, I said to the Berkshire managers this year as I looked out over the crowd, the nice thing about this room is that we would all feel pretty safe just delivering our children to almost anybody selected at random from the group. You couldn't say that at most places. I should say there's a horse race for power and prominence or something or other. So we have a very admirable bunch of people, and we have less bureaucracy than almost anybody. And so that is not a small achievement. I can't think of a single company of our size that has less bureaucracy than we do.
Did you set out to do that at the beginning?
Well, we always hated bureaucracy. And so I would say, in a sense, yes. Wouldn't you say, Warren?
Yeah, absolutely. No, we both
hated it.
And we had the ability, or, you know, was fortunate, we could create the company to some extent that we wanted to have. And I've always said it was crazy to be a painter painting something at the end is not the painting you wanted to have. And Berkshire is a sort of painting. And we haven't walked into some huge organization and had to claw through the progressions and the politics that went. And we have created what we wanted to create.
I don't think we could fix a big bureaucracy.
No,
Warren.
we couldn't. No.
We could create something that didn't become a big bureaucracy. But we couldn't fix one that's already bureaucratic.
Charlie, Warren, Bill, I want to thank all three of you for your time today. We truly appreciate it. Folks, that does it for us today. Make sure you join us tomorrow. Right now, it's time for Squawk on the Street.
Good Monday morning. Welcome to Squawk on the Street. I'm Carl Quintanilla with Jim Cramer, David Faber at the New York Stock Exchange. Pre-markets pretty solid, up nearly 100 points on the back of Friday's 332-point Dow rally. The focus obviously on Buffett in Omaha this morning and over the weekend. 200 more S&P earnings this week, including Disney. Europe is green, oil above 70, 3-year high, as that Iran deal deadline is this weekend. Our roadmap begins with futures looking to build on Friday's rally. Buffett pushing back on bubble fears, saying he First up, Warren Buffett has a message for investors in this environment. Choose stocks over bonds. Earlier on Squawk, Becky Quick asked him if he's concerned about a stock market bubble in light of some recent record highs. Here's his response.
This is not one of those times. Now, if government bonds go to 7 or 8%, which means if you own a long bond now, you get killed, the stock you bought now will not necessarily look attractive. It probably won't be attractive. I mean, interest rates are like gravity. If interest rates are 1%, and they're going to be that for 100 years, obviously anything that yields you 2 or 3% is going to do way better. But I don't think they're going to be 1% for 100 years.
Said it wouldn't take him a nanosecond to choose equities over treasuries.
Right. Well, look, I think that, once again, it's just joyful. Talks about owning index funds for everybody. just says, frankly, that there are not a lot of companies that he'd like to buy right now, and then goes forward and talks about companies that he'd like to buy, as we were talking about during the break, David.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
Like Apple.
Correct.
Yes.
Correct.
You're referring specifically to Apple, which he said he'd like to own all of.
Yeah.
Even Munger, in his avuncular way, said that they'd been too resistant to buying more.
Well, that's
shares.
why I wanted to mention that, because I felt that the most pointed moment this morning when Munger just said, we should have bought more. And that's just, that is just one of those statements from someone whom I revere, just saying, look, the stock is just too cheap. They obviously weren't talking about ecosystem, but look, the takeaway here is that if the largest stock is too cheap, then maybe the market's not so bad.
Maybe not. It's funny, Buffett also spent some of the weekend meeting discussing his failure in not having seen the promise of Alphabet and Amazon. He's talked about Amazon a number of times, calling it almost a miracle what Bezos has pulled off there. But Apple is the one, obviously, that they have chosen to spend a lot of their cash on, although there is plenty of cash still sitting there at Berkshire.
And they did say they'd rather have the cash stake be $30 billion, not $100 billion, but if there were a $100 billion deal to be done, they'd get it done. He did go into his view on Apple. Munger said it was reasonably priced and strong, but this is what Buffett said.
We're not buying a stock when we buy Apple in our minds. We're buying 5% of a business. We buy 100% of some businesses, and when they're publicly held, we buy 5%. But we bring the same thinking to it, we like very much the economics of their activities, and we like very much the management and the way they think and the way they act.
It's coming from two men who don't use an iPhone. Buffett said he has a 10, but has been given one and doesn't know how to use it yet.
Yeah, I think that this is one where they think young. I think that there are a tremendous number of people who miss this because they don't talk to their kids or came late to it. But I thought that was one of the most important things was they don't think that they necessarily came late to this one. You know, they were talking about how they feel that there's still plenty ahead. That is so different from so many of the analysts who look at the universe of suppliers that sell into Apple, make a decision that it's really not breakthrough technology, and just feel like it is, as some of these analysts have said, the best days are behind them. I feel that sometimes these analysts just say, Steve Jobs took the company to his grave. That is amazing, given that Tim Cook has created a tremendous amount of value.
Well, yeah, and Apple stock did move up sharply on Friday when Warren Buffett told Becky Venn of the additional 75 million shares that Berkshire had purchased. That, of course, coming out over the weekend and filing or in the divulging of their full stake, which is some $45+ billion. But still, in a company that's got a more than $900 billion market value, it's a little less than 5%. And what, about $930 billion? I mean, not that far from the $1 trillion mark at this point. Really not that many points to go, given how many shares outstanding there are.
What I thought was curious was that Warren Buffett talked directly about the buyback. That was saying, listen, if they're going to buy it back and keep buying it back, we don't mind going up in size. And we've heard that one other time. We heard that with IBM. And I thought it was really curious that there's IBM, which they said this keeps buying back stock, keeps buying back stock. We're happy to have that. We keep getting bigger and bigger because of the buyback. And then he blew it out. And he picked, I guess from his point of view, the wrong technology company. He said he really didn't understand it in the end. And yet he says he understands Apple. But he understands Apple, I think, as razor blade. He did not, I guess, correctly see the cloud coming, or else he would have bought Amazon and Alphabet. I don't think he understood the concept of the cloud. And maybe that's because in this particular case, the cloud was something that you needed your PC to be working on. You needed your cell phone. I mean, the cloud is something that made it so your cell phone is a mall. Your cell phone there's so much, everything from healthcare to sports, whatever. And I think that by not having a cell phone, they missed the cloud. and they would have bought Amazon or Alphabet had they had a cell phone.
Yeah, they didn't frame it like that, but he said, I blew it, as he said before, and called Bezos once again this morning a brilliant thinker. It reminds me that Telsey initiates Amazon today at Outperform, $1,900 target, on the notion that cloud, AWS, will continue to support retail.
Right.
That's their point.
I mean, obviously, I already just committed heresy by saying that they got something wrong. I should immediately add the fact that they're the best there is. So, I mean, Ted Williams, absolutely, you know, he 60% of the time, Ted Williams did not hit the ball. So that did not make him a hack in that season. In the season, he hit 400, right?
No.
I mean, 400. Can you imagine that? Can you imagine 400? Well, these guys are 400 hitters every year.
Yeah, it's quite a thing to achieve.
Yeah.
Wells is the other interesting point here. Said that is a good fundamental business, very likely to outperform its rivals over the next 10 years. He even got it to a point where he talked about bad headlines. I like bad news that isn't going to last. You got to figure out, though, make sure it's not permanent.
Yeah, look, I think that he validated Tim Sloan. Becky pushed him. Wasn't he part of the old team?
Right.
I just think he's very reluctant to sell some of these stocks that over time has done well. And he's just, I don't know what would get him to sell if that didn't get him to sell.
No, sort of, they put it all behind them at this point. They've weathered what was a difficult storm. I don't know if you guys have noticed the marketing push Wells Fargo's been on lately, whether it's the ads, I've noticed in both print and obviously on television as well.
Yeah, Joe spoke about
aggressive
that.
Marketing.
Yeah, the stagecoach, and then boom. I mean, they don't, the ads, I think the ads correctly say, listen, we're a new old Wells Fargo. I thought that was interesting because it wasn't like they said, the tagline is not, hey, we're all great, we've always been great. That was a very gutsy move by saying we're the new old Wells Fargo.
Starting 2018 is sort of a new date for them.
I liked it.
On their founding.
Yeah.
What was it, 1852 or something?
It was really hard to miss.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I like the fact that there was a subtle acknowledgement that they made a mistake, and now there's a new Wells, and I understand, and I think that Warren Buffett's decision to stick with them is significant, and I think it's going to be a good stock. It's not going to be as good as, I think, J.P. Morgan. And by the way, they love J.P. Morgan.
Right.
And it's interesting, there was a question about Goldman Sachs and whether Goldman Sachs is doing the wrong thing by trading Bitcoin, and Warren Buffett's very, very, very clearly said, look, they're just doing, they're servicing their client. They're not betting on Bitcoin because Bitcoin obviously came in under a huge amount of attack. It was just inflating fire. Was there a moment that they didn't think bad of Bitcoin?
Yeah, Bitcoin got called every name in the book.
Yes.
From a turd to a non-productive asset. To useless artificial gold, I think, as Munger put it earlier this morning.
They struggled to come up with some new negative term. I thought turd was an interesting one, Dave. I don't know whether you have used that term lately. We were kind of off limits at home. We thought it was kind of a...
No, I haven't.
No.
No?
No.
I think we
Buffett-
ought to go there.
No.
Buffett even weighed in on tech regulation, said we're in the early stages, and talked about how it applies specifically to Facebook. Take a listen to that.
I like good news that isn't, or bad news that isn't going to last. And I'm saying that as one of them, but I mean, bad headlines don't bother me. I mean, I had bad headlines when I bought that stock right after 2 or 3 months after Pearl Harbor, and you're going to have bad headlines for a long time. So I am not worried about, we've made the most money when there's been some temporary bad news, I mean, over time.
He did say the privacy angle was very, very important, and that Congress has only started to scratch the surface.
Well, I think that Congress is uniquely not equipped to take this on. There's just, you know, when Facebook picked Senator Kyle, for instance, to analyze whether there's a bias, Senator Kyle is a very revered senator in the Senate. I think that they picked someone from the Justice Department to look at it from the other side. And so Congress basically looks at this and says, you know what, they've really picked really fine people to analyze this. We don't have anything to go on now. They've kind of blunted us. So they apologized. They picked the outsiders. I know I wanted Ted Wells from Paul Weiss. Can't have everything. Senator Kyle is Titan. Used to have Senator Kyle all the time with Kudlow and Kramer. That was the show had
I
the-
remember.
Yes, I remember that show. Yes,
Guys,
absolutely.
now he's chief economic.
Yes, he
He's like
is.
the head. I didn't get anything, but he became the chief economic.
Well, there's
I'm
always-
here.
You've done
He's
okay.
there.
You've done okay.
And
I've done okay, but he really shined.
there's still time. There's still time
There is?
for you. Yes,
Okay, thanks.
absolutely.
How
You
about
see
the Supreme
Charlie
Court?
Munger? He's 95. You've got
I'm 94.
forever, man. 94.
Yes.
Sorry. I don't mean to put another year on Munger. You're going to be fine. You got so many
I all
years.
right?
Yeah, I'd say
Okay,
you're
you know what? We
80s.
have to go, David.
We got to go. I got some good stories on the other side.
You
of this.
do?
Yeah, I got a story.